friends. Welcome to The Secret Place with Stephanie Bennett. I am your host here for this short devotion to talk today about James K.A. Smith's book, You Are What You Love, The Spiritual Power of Habit. And there's so much in here. I've talked about Smith before, but there's one part in here, a line. Actually, it's just a line that I want to read you and then talk about it for a little bit. He says, the pathology that besets us in this cultural moment is a failure of imagination. Specifically, the failure to imagine the other as neighbor. Think about that one. Think about that one. The person that bothers you the most today, this moment, think about him. Think about her. Maybe it's an actual neighbor on your street or in your apartment complex. Who bothers you? Who grains against you? That's your neighbor. That's your neighbor. That's my neighbor. And James K.A. Smith says that this one, it's a pathology that besets us and all of us in this cultural moment because we fail to recognize that one as our neighbor, as the one who we need to love our neighbor. And I think part of this comes from a kind of fall or decline, I should say, in empathy in our world. And specifically, let me say in the States, because I live here and I don't know what it's like in Uganda or Kenya or Germany or Switzerland. I have not lived there. But I have studied here and I've seen here, and that long-term empathy study from the 80s through now, it was like almost a 40-year empathy study showing how in the demographic from 18 to 25, empathy has gone down to an all-time low in the last 10 years. There's so many reasons for that, but I think that lack of empathy is part of why we don't envision the unknown other as our neighbor, the one who is driving at 80 miles an hour on the highway and cutting us off, the one who is snubbing us at the market, or bumping into us, or, just being rude in any fashion. The empathy is ultimately, Smith says, a feat of the imagination. And arguments are no therapy for a failed, shriveled imagination. So what we end up doing is we end up arguing with folks instead of supping with them. We end up arguing and debating and blowing them off, like just, I don't care about you. Or like I said on the highway, cutting people off, not thinking about what they're going through, not thinking about really anything but ourselves. That's a lack of empathy right there. And then listening to others. I want to almost refute the empathy studies that are out there, because this past year with COVID, the people that I've been listening to are very empathetic, and there seems to be a lot of caring out there for the weariness that's going on in the world. But then there's quite a bit of lack of empathy that I see in some of the things that have gone on in the world. The racial rioting and protesting, the Republican-Democrat divide, the progressive-conservative divide, the arguments in the media. It's just become such a fiasco, and I think I'd like to, academically, I always talk about the media and communication practices and what we're missing there. But here today in The Secret Place, I think, honestly, part of it, I just don't even want to talk about the media and the problems that are more like the shoots and the flowers and the weeds of the problem. It's really, there's a root, and there's a lack of what Smith is saying, imagining the other as our neighbor. What does it mean if someone is living close to you and you share a property line or you share a wall? You have to care about whether or not it's 4 in the morning and your children are keeping them up, or it's it's 3 in the morning and your music is keeping their children up. We have to learn to live with one another as neighbors. And most people do, I think, as we do, we get along and we live. But when we don't and we fight against that and we argue, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, we kind of, we decline in our empathy and our caring and our ability to have compassion and understanding. And it makes life a little bit more miserable than it really should be. I think we have a culture of argumentation that we're dealing with right now. And there's a place for argument. There's a place for healthy argument, for healthy disagreement and argument. But it seems like everything in our culture in the West has become a contesting, an argument, where it's someone's got to win and someone's got to lose. And that is so short on imagination. Think about what your neighbor might be going through. Put ourselves in their shoes and think more about the common good. What is good for both of us? What is good for all of us in this community? What is good for all of us in this world? All of us on this campus, all of us in this family. Not just what is good for me and what works for me. I think that that's where the crisis comes, and that's where the love is lost, that we have a shriveled imagination. We think we're the only ones hurting. We are clueless to the hurt and the pain of others. And today I'm thinking about trying not to think about my own pain constantly and trying not to think about my own upset, whether it's physical or emotional, and thinking about pain of others from the past. This is affecting me so greatly lately. Have you been dealing with this at all? Have you been thinking about any aspect of what I'm talking about today? The fact that we are all kind of not showing, or not just showing, kind of low on the compassion and empathy levels. It's like there's not a whole lot of gas in the tank for empathy. And yet if we just stop, really, again, and think about if that person was my son, or if that person doing this to me was my daughter, or my first cousin, or my father or mother, how would I deal with them? Hey, you're not going to deal with everybody in the world in an intimate relationship, but how would you want someone else dealing with your father or your mother or your daughter or your son? Even I'm going to go back to my example about being on the road. Someone is driving crazy and you can't stand it. You just get so angry. How dare they do this? Is there anything that you can do to change them? Well, not really. However, do you want to go racing after them and start, like a bumper to bumper war? I've seen so much of that. If you're living in the country and on dirt roads still, man, you're in a place that is not typical in the United States. Yep, there's a lot of landmass there where there is farm and whatnot, but there are a lot of highways in this country now, and drivers having, road rage. You don't have to go after people. Think about what you would like someone to do if that was your son or your daughter or your father or your mother having a bad day. You might be saying, well, I'd talk to my father or my mother. I wouldn't let them do this. I would talk to my son. You can talk, but people do what they want to do. So let's just have compassion on each other. And if the compassion is running short, if the empathy is running short, let's use our imagination. God gave us our imagination, and it's not just for our creativity to sing songs and write beautiful stories and shoot films and whatnot. It is for our creativity, but He gave us an imagination to help us. Imagine the good, will you? Imagine the good with me. Imagine the need with me. Imagine the other as your neighbor. Thanks for stopping in. I am glad you're here. I hope you will leave a comment or a thought, a question, and I will get back to you, I promise. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you next time in the secret place. Until then, peace and every good. Bye-bye now.